So, 2023 has finally come to a close. And for the first half of this year, the movies were pretty good. There was a lot of content coming out, and most of it was pretty good. I enjoyed it. Now, as for the other half, at least we had the first half, right? Happy New Year, everyone. And we are looking at the best movies of 2023. I've done this for the past 3 years, so why stop now? Now, as you could probably tell from the title, I've expanded this list to 15 instead of 10, and that's simply because there was just so many great movies this year that I couldn't narrow it down to a top 10 if I tried. If you're wondering, we'll not be making a worst movies of the year list because simply I didn't see enough bad movies this year to make a top 10 worst movies of the year. So overall, while this may not have been as good as 2021, I still think that's one of the best years for movies in a very long time. This was still a solid year, and I'd say it's an improvement over 2022. And of course, this is just my list. There's definitely going to be choices on here that you don't agree with, and that's fine. So long as you're civil about it, we can discuss in the comments down below. Without further ado, let's get to some honorable mentions. Scream 6, a fun, entertaining slasher that, while may not be as good as its predecessor, Scream 5, was still a very solid entry into the franchise. It's a shame what's happening to the franchise right now. The Super Mario Bros. Movie, a fun, entertaining movie that gave me everything I could have wanted from as a Mario fan. Talk to me, an intense, thrilling horror movie with the best lead performance in a horror movie all year. Saw X, an interesting, engaging movie that feels no longer than its predecessors and is easily the best Saw movie since the original. A Man Called Otto, a heartfelt yet heartbreaking movie that tackles some deep themes and pulls it off wonderfully. The Blackening, a hilarious, entertaining horror comedy that was some of the most fun I've ever had in a theater this year. And Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, a weird yet interesting and engaging entry into the MCU that features an intense and menacing villain. Again, a shame what's happening with that. Now with the honorable mentions out of the way, let's get on to the top 15 best movies of 2023. At number 15, I have Finest Kind. Now, I know not many people are going to agree with this list. Many people seem to not like this movie. However, I found this movie to be really entertaining and engaging. The story was interesting. All the twists and turns the movie took, I was on board with. I never got confused with it. And while, yes, there may be some bad dialogue, some bad editing, it didn't bog the movie down for me. I still had a great time with this. I found it interesting for its whole 2-hour runtime, and I was really invested in everything that was going on. It's a real accomplishment when Jenna Ortega, which I think is one of the most promising young actors in Hollywood right now, is the weakest part of this movie because I was just so engaged with everything else going around in the movie. At number 14, I have Elemental. Now, again, many people might not agree with this and might think this movie isn't that good, but personally, I thought this was Pixar's best entry since Soul. Elemental takes me right back to classic Pixar, and this is really, in my opinion, one of their best entries so far. The story is interesting, the animation is of course stunning, but where this movie really shines is with its two main characters. They have some amazing chemistry together, and it's one of, if not the best love stories you'll find in 2023. At number 13, I have A Haunting in Venice. Now, I love Murder on the Orient Express, and I thought Death on the Nile was also pretty great. It made the honorable mentions of last year. So I was obviously going to be more keen to this movie than maybe some other people that weren't fans of those movies. But still, I had my doubts going in. I thought that horror element that they were going with was going to feel tacked on, but I was proved wrong when this ended up being the best of the trilogy. The mystery is super engaging, and the bits of horror add to it instead of taking away, and it just keeps you invested the whole time. The characters are engaging. I may like some of the other characters in the other movies more, but they're still probably just as engaging as those characters. The movie also looks beautiful, taking like a different location than we're used to in these movies. And I'd have to say, this is probably the most engaged I've been in one of these movies. This movie runs at a tight hour and 45 minutes, and it still manages to feel shorter than its runtime. It's that good. Now, my number 12 is probably going to be everybody's number one, but personally, it just wasn't as good as some of the other movies I've seen this year, and I'm just not going to keep dragging this on. Number 12 is Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Now, I know everybody's freaking out that this isn't even in the top 10, but to be fair, I think this movie is still great, hence why it has a spot on this list, but personally, I prefer Into the Spider-Verse more, and I found the second act of this movie, while it was still good, it just didn't have the charm that I wanted from like a Spider-Verse movie, so that's why it's lower on here. But I'd be lying if I said that this movie still wasn't fantastic. It's a real accomplishment when you have a 2 hour and 20-minute movie and manage to make it feel like an hour. Even after rewatching this movie, I don't know how many times, like 2 or 3 maybe, it still felt like an hour and I was still engaged in everything that was going on in this movie. That's an impressive feat. The characters are masterfully developed, the story is masterfully told, and the ending just has me foaming at the mouth for the next one. While this may not be as good as Into the Spider-Verse, it is still a great sequel. At number 11, I have The Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Now, some people may not have this on their list, but personally, I think this is my favorite Hunger Games movie. I found the story in here to be super complex, giving us an insight on both sides of the story. It's nothing I've really seen from a Hunger Games movie. Maybe it goes more in depth in the books, but for me, this was like a new experience, and like seeing how the Capitol reacted when the Hunger Games were like really new. The acting in here is really good for a Hunger Games movie, and the pacing is great. I never really found myself bored during this. Even though you can sometimes feel the runtime, I was engaged pretty much throughout. Now, some people might say that the third act is where the movie drops off. I disagree. I still think it's as strong as the first 2 acts, and I really liked seeing like the aftermath of the Hunger Games in this movie. It's not something we really see that often, so I thought this movie was a real treat for Hunger Games fans, and probably the best movie of the franchise. Alright, number 10 is going to be a controversial one, but at number 10, I have Cocaine Bear. I mean, probably, I don't know how many people are going to agree with this, but personally, I found this to be the most fun movie of the entire year. I just had a blast watching this. It's just a really simple story, and it's like not taking itself too seriously. It's just like a bear that does cocaine and goes on a massive rampage, and it was super fun to see. And while many people may think that the characters are bogging this movie down, I didn't. I found them to be either interesting or funny, and I don't think I hated a single person in this movie. Overall, this movie was just a blast. I really liked watching this one. At number 9, I have Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I know, a lot of superhero movies on here, and we're not even done with this yet, because I still think there's one superhero movie on here that's better than both Across the Spider-Verse and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. But regardless, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, while I might prefer Volume 2 over this, I still think this is a very solid entry into the Guardians trilogy. It's emotional. It has some of the most emotion of the entire MCU, where I had to like sit for a few days and just contemplate what I watched. And the story is very good, and I think it balanced tones very well. I found myself laughing, crying, and in awe all in the same movie, and none of it felt like it was interrupting any of the emotions I was feeling. It's just a very great send-off to this crew that we've known to grow and love. At number 8 is Sick. This is my favorite horror movie of the year, hands down. I really enjoyed this movie, and it's a shame that people aren't talking about it. Maybe because it went to streaming and wasn't like a huge release, but I still think that this is like one of the definitive slasher movies of our generation, and I don't put that lightly. This has everything that, as a slasher fan, I could have wanted. It has cool kills, a tight pacing. I didn't feel like I could breathe at any part of this movie because it just runs like 83 minutes with credits, and it has a unique spin on the genre. I can't say that there's like a COVID horror movie I've seen before this. Some people may not like the COVID aspect of this, but I really enjoyed it. I thought it was used really well. It's everything that me personally I want out of a slasher movie, and it's my favorite horror movie of the entire year. At number 7, I have Creed 3. While I may like the first Creed a bit more than this, I still think that this is a top 3 movie in the Rocky and Creed franchise. The story in here is great. It feels personal. It feels like you've been betrayed like the characters have been betrayed. It's really good and how a Rocky/Creed movie should be. On top of that, the movie is well acted, engaging. It's the shortest Creed movie at like maybe a little less than 2 hours. And I honestly could have taken another 20 minutes of this movie. That's how entertaining it was. And on top of that, it has one of the best endings this year. There's a certain part in it that I won't spoil that just every time I watch it sends chills down my spine. It's amazing. At number 6, I have John Wick Chapter 4. Now, this is easily the best John Wick movie in the entire franchise. They just keep getting better and better, and somehow this movie tops it all with some of the most insane stunts I've seen, like, probably ever. It's just so well choreographed and so well shot. In a world where we're used to more so like CGI and messy action shots, this looked amazing. I was really surprised by it. The story is interesting and engaging, and it's probably the most entertained I've been by a John Wick movie, despite being the longest in the franchise. It's very impressive when this movie that runs 3 hours only feels like 2 hours. It's incredible, and I had a great time watching it. Easily the best John Wick movie. At number 5, I have Nimona. This is definitely my favorite animated movie of the year. I really found the story in here to be engaging and fun. Sure, it's not the most original, but I think it's still pretty strong, and I was engaged during the whole time. The animation was gorgeous. The humor landed for the most part. Maybe there were a few jokes that didn't quite land, but for the most part, it was funny. I was laughing quite a bit during it. And on top of that, I found myself genuinely caring about these characters. It's just a great movie that everyone can enjoy. Number 4 was the biggest surprise of the entire year for me. Godzilla -1. Now, I'm not familiar with Godzilla like at all. I've only seen the MonsterVerse movies of him, and I've never seen like a foreign Godzilla movie. And man, am I regretting it, because Godzilla -1 was fantastic. This movie fixed like the biggest pet peeve I've had for a while in the Godzilla movies I've seen. This movie has great characters. They carry the movie, and that's how it should be. If you can't show Godzilla the whole time, then at least make some interesting characters that we can get invested in and care for when Godzilla shows up. And that's what this movie did, and it pulled it off perfectly. Speaking of Godzilla, he's a menace in this movie. He's easily like the most threatened I've been by him, and the sound design is fantastic. I mean, my whole theater was rumbling when I saw this. This movie was so good that like a day or so after I saw it, I told my friend about it, and we decided to go see it again for like his birthday a few days later. And I liked it even more on the second time. It's just that great. At number 3, I have Blue Beetle. This is easily my favorite superhero movie of the entire year. It had a good story, maybe not the most original, but I was still invested in everything that was going on. The action was good, maybe some CGI looked a little iffy, but I can excuse that because this was originally supposed to be a streaming movie, and in terms of that, this movie looks great. But what really carried this movie for me was the family dynamic. This movie felt personal. It felt human because the family was so good in this movie, and there were some parts where I got a little emotional. I'm not gonna lie. It was just really great to see. Blue Beetle is easily my favorite superhero movie of the entire year. At number 2, I have Oppenheimer. This movie was amazing. Now, I understand everybody's not going to love this movie. People might find it boring, people might find it uninteresting. But personally, I found this to be one of the most engaging movies I've seen all year. This movie runs 3 hours, and almost all of it is just about court issues and stuff. And I was engaged. I found the conversations in here to be the most interesting and thought-provoking conversations of the entire year. And the scene where the atomic bomb is finally tested is one of the most intense and unforgettable scenes of the entire year. This is just truly a masterpiece, and I think that this movie deserves to win Best Picture, but there was just one movie that I liked even more. And at number 1, I have Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. Now, I'm a big Mission Impossible fan. I've liked pretty much every movie in this franchise, so I don't put it lightly when I say that this is easily the best movie of the entire franchise. It has the longest runtime of the entire franchise, but that didn't stop me from being invested from beginning to end. I found this movie extremely entertaining, and more entertaining than some of like the 2-hour Mission Impossible movies. The stakes in this movie were unreal. There were characters in here that I was worried that weren't going to make it when I wouldn't be worried about them in other movies because they were just kind of sidelined. This movie like puts everyone front and center, and you don't feel like anyone's safe. And once a few characters do end up biting the dust, it's emotional and you're upset. And of course, the stunts in here are just fantastic. And the finale with the train, probably the most intense sequence of the entire franchise. I was like leaning forward in my chair the whole time, and like my palms were sweaty. It was just insane. This movie wraps up the first part really well, and I felt satisfied with it, even though there's still more to tell. And let me just tell you, I'm foaming at the mouth to see what they have to do next. Well, guys, that's my list for the top 15 best movies of 2023. Share yours down below. Thank you for watching my channel this year. Like, the last few weeks is like the most insane growth I've gotten out of this entire channel. It was incredible. We like went from 60 to 100 something subscribers. It was insane. Thank you all for the support, and have a happy new year. See ya.